FinTechTalk, the live webinar with no presentations, no PowerPoint, just talk.
Hello and welcome to FinTechTalk. I'm your host, Charles Alton-Jones. Today we're looking at a really serious problem in the wealth management industry. Last year, MiFID II was upgraded to introduce what were apparently quite simple rules regarding sustainability and suitability. Wealth managers were required to get to know their clients better, to make sure that the products offered were in line with what their clients wanted and needed. Now, our friends at Oxford Risk have conducted some research that suggests that 2/3 of wealth managers are not up to speed with these new rules. Now, this is a problem in terms of compliance. You could be breaking the rules, but it's a massive missed opportunity. How can it be that wealth managers are not able to understand their clients well enough to comply with MiFID II? It's not good enough. So here at FinTech Talk, we have recruited 3 world experts on this subject to show you exactly what you could and should be doing. So without further ado, let me introduce our guests. And I'm delighted from Oxford Risk, we have Greg Davies. Greg is Head of Behavioral Science at Oxford Risk. Now, Oxford Risk combines behavioral finance, data science, quantitative finance, and technology to help people make really great financial decisions. So Greg, great to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great. We have Jonas Tulin, Head of Asset Management at Erik Penser Bank, wealth manager, which employs about 100 people in Stockholm. Is one of the best-known wealth managers in Sweden. Jonas is an expert in this department. Jonas, good to have you with us.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Fantastic. And we have Stefan Moser. Stefan is Head of Investment Compliance at VP Bank. VP Bank has been around for more than 6 decades. It's headquartered in Liechtenstein, but it's a global organization with branches in Switzerland, Singapore, and Hong Kong. Before joining the bank, Stefan was director at a Big Four consulting firm with responsibilities for all aspects of regulatory compliance. This really is his specialist area. So you won't find anyone in the world who knows more about it. Lovely to have you with us, Stefan.
Thank you for the invitation, Charles.
Cool. Well, this debacle really is summed up by a news story in International Advisor, which contains this figure produced by Oxford Risk. Only 38% of European wealth managers are up to speed on ESMA MiFID directives on sustainability. Greg, what is going on? These rules ought to be straightforward. It looks as if the industry is making a hash of it. What can you tell us?
Well, it ought to be straightforward, perhaps, but very often are not straightforward. The general problem here is if you're trying to establish what is suitable for an individual investor, there are so many moving parts that you really should be considering if you're going to view this investor or this client holistically, that those parts connect together in very, very complicated ways. And there is a very big temptation for wealth managers when they're faced by regulations that are, what the regulations are there to try and do, the spirit of the law, if you like, is to match investors to the thing that is right for them. Because there are lots of complicated moving parts, however, the interpretation often of the wealth manager is, how do I get past this bureaucratic burden as easy as possible? And they end up asking a different set of questions. The questions they are not asking is, what is the right thing for this investor, given all the complicated ambiguities of humans, etc.? The question that gets asked is, how do I tick the set of boxes I need to tick as effectively and as efficiently as possible? So we have this general problem of following the letter of the law is actually not only is it not following the spirit of the law, in very many cases it's in fact contrary to the spirit of the law.
That's really succinctly put. And yeah, it really does therefore sound like a missed opportunity if people are just regarding this as a pain in the rear end. I wonder what, Jonas, in Sweden, what is your approach? I mean, do you see this as a sort of a tick box exercise, as a way to avoid a rap on the knuckles from the regulator? How does it work in your organization?
I think that varies a lot on who you are talking to. As per normal, these things, you have early adopters and people that find this quite straightforward and quite rational and fits into the business model quite quite good. And then obviously they're always going to have the tick in the box, just how can we round this regulation, as we have tried so many times before in the financial community, and quite often quite successfully. So I think you're always going to have that little bit of a conflict. And I think this goes back also to the root of, do we as asset managers, and do we fully understand sustainability through the eyes of the regulators? And regardless of whatever we have built in terms of a legacy internally, in terms of how we view sustainability, you have a national collision there, and sometimes a perfect mutual coexistence. So you have all different angles coming on top of this, and it's not enough if we understand it ourselves as asset managers. Also, the advisors have to understand this, and you have to be able to express this understandably to the customer. And we find that is quite difficult. To just explain Article 8 or 9 funds to a retail investor is quite often quite difficult, actually, because there's just so many expressions and there's so many technical definitions, et cetera, et cetera. So we definitely see the conflict, but we also see examples of how you can actually utilize this in your business.
Yeah, and Stefan, it sounds like there's a lot of different approaches to this. How do you see things at VP Bank?
I mean, obviously coming from the client's area, you first tend to always look at the regulation and look how can you build a regulation without exposing yourself to the authorities. The key, in my opinion, is to not just treat the regulation as a burden in that case, but rather seeing it as a chance. And I know this sounds obviously quite easy and very broad, but especially this piece of regulation gives you a lot of insight about your clients. And as Jonas already mentioned, I mean, you can talk to your clients about Article 8 or Article 9 funds, and especially if they're retail clients, knowledge about these technical terms will be scarce at best. But the thing is, you get to understand how your client is thinking, how your client is approaching topics of sustainability. You get to know a lot about your clients, not only suitability criteria, but rather what are his ambitions, what is he looking for, what is he trying to achieve with his investments. And I think the biggest gain that you can get from the regulation is trying to combine all of these factors and all of these information in a very comprehensive client picture, and therefore also giving yourself some sort of USP towards your competitors.
Okay. Now, Greg, if I could bring you in, because I think what Stefan has said really touched on something interesting, which is that it may not just be the organizations at fault. It may be that clients are difficult people. There are many different knowledge bases out there, and there is an opportunity for wealth managers to get to know their clients better. But unless it's a kind of private bank situation where you can really sit down with someone for days on end, wealth managers are really going to struggle to get to know their clients. I'm just wondering what you can recommend with your knowledge of behavioral finance and the use of technology to get to know clients. What could organizations be doing that maybe they're not doing already?
Yeah, and if I may just agree with some of the points that have been put on earlier, I think there is a wide range of different approaches here. And certainly some organizations are doing this very well. But the range of responses to the regulation and how it's tackled is very, very large. I think, it is possible to get to know your client, even if you are not working in the ultra high net worth private banking world, if we start to use technology more effectively. Yeah. Because in fact, even if you are in the world where you can spend an awful lot of time with clients and you sit them down in a wood paneled room and have a trout lunch with them or whatever it may be, even there, not all advisors are equally good intuitive psychologists, for example. Not all advisors are going to be collecting and putting together all these bits and pieces of information in the same way. So even in the world where you can spend a lot of time with your client, the use of technology can make advisors more effective in getting to a consistent answer, so that the same client, if that client went to 100 different advisors, would get roughly the same answer, because what you should get is the answer that's right for the client, not the answer that happens to pop into the advisor's head. So technology, keeping track of the moving parts, making sure that they're all put together in a consistent way that delivers a recommended outcome, that can be very effectively done both at the higher wealth levels, but also it can be done in a way that saves massive amount of human time. And let's be honest, in almost every advisory proposition, the bit that is most expensive is the human time. And the human time is valuable because there is stuff humans can do that a machine never will. The empathy, the ability to deal with ambiguity, the ability to really connect the diagnosis and the outcome to a path of activity and make people comfortable going on it. The problem is we have an awful lot of humans, expensive humans, doing stuff that humans really aren't that good at, which is the juggling multiple pieces of information, being accurate, objective profilers of individual needs, of individual psychology, etc. So, I mean, you're absolutely right. This is more difficult if you can spend less time with the client. But the use of technology and profiling tools and data in order to make advisors quicker and faster and more accurate, I think is very useful.
Okay, just give us some idea of what you're talking about, because I'm not an expert in this field. I'm sure some of our viewers are not. When you think about technology, I mean, some organizations have a couple of boxes you can tick or a slider between 0 and 10 in terms of risks. Some people's approach is really crude. So what is possible? You know, give us a clue as to what really cutting-edge technology in this field looks like for people who've never seen it before.
Yeah, so the first thing is the science, right? If just asking someone a question doesn't mean they're going to give you an answer that's accurate. So if you are using a question set that has been arrived at by a very deep analysis of how thousands of other people have answered those questions, and you're calibrating relative to a broad population, the accuracy of what you're measuring and the fact that you're measuring the right thing becomes better. But then you can put that into technology that elicits those answers really fast. So just for example, a standard deployment of our financial personality assessment at Oxford Risk, we would be measuring not just risk tolerance, but 5 different dimensions of financial personality. And the questions that we need to put in front of you to get a stable score on that will take roughly 90 seconds to 2 minutes of your engagement time to get good, psychometrically accurate and robust and stable scores. And once I've got a measure on 5 different measures of personality across my whole client base, what I can do with that is phenomenal, because I can use it to personalize product recommendations, to personalize the tone of my communication, to segment people. So technology can get us to an accurate answer really astonishingly quickly on much of this.
Interesting. Do you do this bespoke for each client, or is it what sounds like it would be a standard product across wealth managers? So you do end up with that uniform result. Do people fine tune it internally?
We fine tune it to make sure that it's calibrated for different populations. So if we're doing it in a different language, for example, right now we're doing a translation and calibration in Sweden. So there's a little bit of fine tuning, but by and large, people's psychology and the fundamental dimensions of how they differ is pretty constant everywhere in the world. So the same basic idea can be deployed rapidly in many geographies.
Interesting. Jonas, how do you actually do this work inside Pensa Bank, and how do you segment your customers? I mean, you could do it all sorts of ways. So I'm just curious as to the reality, what really goes on.
Yeah, exactly. Or you can actually do it from a completely different point of view. Let's say that we realize that we might not be able to do that. We might not be able to ask the right questions. We're a bit unsure of how to quantify that, how to illustrate that, how to log it and show everything to regulators. The other way around is, why don't we adopt the products? So whatever we sell, we can sort of guarantee a least common denominator in terms of sustainability that is high enough to beat Article 8 funds. So basically what we've done is, as we're a small house, we realized quite quickly that, okay, there are probably going to be technical solutions on this. There are probably going to be ways of doing this. But in the beginning, it might be easy for us, as we are working with an open architecture, i.e. we look at the entire world's all financial products. We're not locked into our own funds or Swedish funds in that sense. That means they can actually screen everything from a sustainability criteria and ensure that almost regardless what the consumer says, it's going to fit them in terms of sustainability criteria. Now, obviously, we're going to have consumers who say we don't care at all about this. They're still going to get a sustainable portfolio. We might not talk about it, but it's still going to be for us in order to build economies of scale. So we sort of switch around, and that actually goes back to we as a house have a quite strict sustainability policy of what the bank and the owner family, what they want to stand and represent in terms of sustainability. So it sort of made sense from us to just think that, okay, maybe we should be the house where the products are we do the work in the products rather than doing the front end work with the consumers, as there will be, as I think we will allude a little bit to, there will be technical solutions, there'll be a whole work on if a customer answers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, what does that actually mean in terms of sustainability criteria and how to qualify that and to prove it, et cetera, et cetera. What does that mean from a pie perspective, et cetera. So we sort of just decided to re-engineer everything from the other end.
That is fascinating. It does make sense. It does make sense because it sounds like there's almost a two-way process. That, I mean, Jonas, are you educating your clients? I mean, if they say they think they, have this orientation towards sustainability, do you say, no, in-house, we've made this view about what sustainability really means? Have you considered this? What do we do that?
Exactly. Basically, if we sort of on a very high level, we think if you take all the what are there 147 different principal adverse impact scores. There are, SDG targets. Obviously, you have the CO2 scope 1, 2, 3. So roughly about 550 different matrices that we fine tune. So if the consumer wants to say, well, what does that actually mean in terms of CO2? How much do I actually save? What does that mean in terms of tonnage? What does that mean in terms of how many cars do I have to save the planet from? Then we have the data. We can show them that as a sort of an appendix to sort of traditional, what do we think on the macro and equities, etc. So it's quite often so that we show them actually what does that mean in terms of strong, hardcore limits in terms of how many targets, how many goals on the UN SDGs do we want to target? Should we do all of them? Should we do 4 or 5 of them? Or should we make sure that we're not working against any one of them? So there are a whole range of different things that are just resulting in math and numbers.
Okay. Wow. And Stefan, take us into what happens in Liechtenstein. I mean, to my mind, there are potentially 2 ways of doing this. One is to comply, but then have your own way of getting to know clients. And the other way is to make this, to really take the best out of this MiFID II initiative and say, okay, they've asked us to conduct this research. Let's really go to town on it. Let's get to know our clients as well as possible. Let's be creative with segments. Just tell us how it works at VP Bank.
Well, we've decided to support the sustainability cause very early, even before the regulation was coming into force and even before it was significantly announced. So we internally developed some sort of scoring on how we are rating different assets, different financial instruments. And give them a score. We use the scale from 1 to 10 in our internal models, looking at how sustainable are certain financial investments, what are the negatives, what is the contribution towards a sustainability topic, and we've used these metrics in advising our clients if they offered a preference in that area. Now, when the regulation come, obviously a lot of your self-developed models are kind of crashing against the wall of the hard facts of the regulation. So you have to somehow adjust and slightly find a way on at one side comply with the regulation, but still make sure that all your efforts that you've put into it in the past does not go lost. So what we did is, of course, we had a close look at the regulation, took out the must-haves, took out those things that you absolutely need to comply with, and then put the layer on top, saying, okay, but we've still got a lot of additional information on certain instruments. We're not just relying on whatever the regulation provides in terms of hard facts, but we are having our own metrics above that, and that helps us select instruments for our clients that offer or that are looking for a preference. And we're also always on the lookout for interesting cooperations. We're now in the process of testing another investment product that is specifically strongly reliant on even further specialized sustainable investments, and where we're using different AI tools to gather further data on sustainability criteria. Just like Jonas mentioned, I mean, you've got like 500 different metrics that you could cover, and we just want to get away from the situation where you end up like Greg mentioned in the beginning. If you classify a client according to the regulation, you would probably ask 100 advisors, and by applying standard tools that are available on the market, you would pretty much always get the same recommendations, because all items, all instruments, all information is always clustered in the same way. And we're trying to get away from that and getting into a more in-depth view on sustainability and how to address our clients' needs and desires in that area.
I'd ask you a nosy question, Stefan. When it comes to designing this stuff, to what degree is it all done in-house with your own spontaneous creativity? Or to what degree do you work in cooperation with others in the wealth management industry and ask them, either formal or informally, what do you do? And maybe even, quietly go on and have a look at other people's systems. How have you gained an awareness of what other people in the industry are doing?
I mean, obviously, you're always looking at the market. You're always looking at good and best practices. You're always looking at bad practices as well, because you can learn from those just about as much as the others. What we originally did is invent a lot of it in-house, but especially when it comes to application of topics like artificial intelligence, etc., you often kind of struggle with all the implementing all of these various solutions into your sometimes old-fashioned banking systems. And so we have a healthy mixture at the moment. We're quite happy with our VPSS, with our sustainability scoring that we have developed in-house. We're always trying to enhance it, feeding in new data, enhancing the selection mechanism. But as I said, we're also looking at cooperations, especially in the fintech area. There's a lot of great people with great ideas looking for partners that can substantially support them. And I think this is just to the mutual benefit of both parties, because you personally get, as a bank, you get new insights, you get new technological solutions, you get probably more fancier user interfaces than you would probably produce in-house, and at the other side, fintechs get access to a larger market to test their solutions.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, Greg, this is kind of your specialist area. I mean, just tell us about how much you benefit from working with multiple organizations here, because I'm fascinated by the way some companies really do this kind of all by themselves and come up with some esoteric solution. Just tell me, how much do you benefit from working with multiple different organizations and learning from all of the different approaches? I mean, you must be able to pool the expertise of everyone you work with, Greg.
Yeah, no, it's invaluable, and particularly in an area like this where we see such a wide range of interpretation of the regulation, but also such a wide range of different propositions. So this notion that we have a product shelf where we make sure that everyone has a minimum standard. I mean, that's brilliant. And it certainly is one way of getting very directly to making sure your clients are getting things that are suitable. But there are others who simply don't do it that way. And being able to understand all of the myriad of different approaches right now and just sort of take the best of each. And then I guess our advantage as an organization is we build software that centralizes what we learn ourselves from our own research and then what we learn from others. We're in the midst of going through a series of workshops with industry specialists and advisors in the UK, because the UK regulators have yet to publish their regulation on sustainability. And it looks like it's going to be quite different to MiFID. So we're going to have to rapidly come up with a different way of connecting preferences to outcomes. But what is fundamentally important for us is to ask real questions. So firstly, what do people genuinely have preferences for? And MiFID, a very literal reading of MiFID, seems to ask advisors to ask investors for their preferences for things they couldn't possibly have preferences for. You know, what percentage of your portfolio would you like to ensure has at least X percentage of things that match the EU taxonomy for blah, 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 right? There's nobody out there who, even specialists, who genuinely have a preference for that. So it's not measurable. So what do people have preferences for? What can we measure? Because some preferences are really unstable. And then what's stable? And once we can describe people in the most effective way, then we go, okay, in this regulatory framework, how do we do it for your proposition or your proposition? And that's where looking at the range of how firms are doing this, I think is exceptionally handy to us, yeah.
That's great answer. And we have a question from one of our viewers. Steve Almond asks, how can wealth managers address the challenge of evolving sustainability criteria and changing investor preferences over time? I mean, Jonas, if I can put this to you, this is not a one-off thing, is it? I mean, views change. I mean, I think our views on nuclear power has changed. I mean, perhaps in Germany, they've got strong views about this. So how does it go? How do you work on an ongoing basis? I mean,
I'm just laughing because I think that's one of the questions that keeps me up at night more than the sell-off in the U.S. equity market, because there's constant change, there are constant new definitions, and the regulators are not done. I mean, we're right now heading into should we standardize ESG ratings in equity analysis? What does that mean for us? It's that, you always have one thing after another. I mean, all of them probably very good. But for us, that's just another reason of, if I almost should put it bluntly, in a way, just give up. I mean, we can't do the reading in the technical criteria. We can't follow the written law. It's just too much material. What we can follow, what we sort of are comfortable with in my group are numbers. So whenever there is a new regulation, there are boundless of providers. Obviously, you have to sort of buy into the idea that we can trust X number of suppliers on data, how to define and how to publish pie data, for example, or whatever other data that you're looking at. But if you accept that, so you can sort of rely on a third-party source or sources, I should say, then it's all of a sudden quite easy, because as soon as there's a new regulation, unsurprisingly, the larger houses out there like MSCI Analytics, for all their faults and challenges or whatever, they're always going to have a solution, 5 to 12, and they'll pop up with a new module like, well, we worked it out together with you in the industry. This is how we can quantify it. This is how we can prove it. And lo and behold, EU has a tendency to follow the big rating houses. So it always becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy in that sense. So once you jump on that carousel, it's very difficult to jump off it. So we're a bit hostage in that sense, which is not super comfortable feeling. But then again, we have a third party. We have to rely on whatever sources that we have. So sort of, it's almost like it started off with a sort of downbeat realization that there was just so many regulations coming up in so many areas that we have no expertise in. As a small wealth manager, we can't hire ESG people or environmentalists or governance specialists or whatever. We simply have to source the data, and to our experience, that becomes quite satisfying project once you accept the idea of sourcing it externally.
Fantastic. And Stefan, VP Bank, I mean, how do you cope with the rules changing over time, but also client preferences changing over time? I mean, how do you keep things fresh on an ongoing basis?
I mean, client preferences changing over time is actually a
a good thing, because that shows that the regulation somehow is also reaching its goals by having the financial industry also having an influence on what is happening in the whole sustainability area, and being one of the major players that has an influence on that. I mean, obviously, keeping up to speed with the regulation on a technical side is much more difficult, especially considering if you're not having a very agile systems and stuff like that, but rather working in regular IT cycles. It doesn't make life easier for the development team, that's for sure. But the thing is, and that once again brings me back to what I said before. I mean, you have to cover the baseline of the regulation. That is the most important part, in my opinion. And the rest you put on top, you're usually not as inflexible as with traditional banking software, because you have your own solutions that you can use to differentiate from your competitors on the market. And I think that in the end is key for any bank.
Fantastic. Now, I'm just going to ask you all three, really, what must be a practical session to pass on your advice? I mean, people are watching this thinking, yeah, we've heard a lot about what we could be doing, but how do we really nail this subject? I mean, Greg, if you want to address our audience, what advice can you give them on really getting this right?
I think it actually comes back to some of the responses to that previous question there, and right back to where I started, which is the difference between the spirit of the law and the letter of the law. If the regulation is changing, if it's complicated, if the product set is changing, the terminology is changing, etc., trying desperately and in great detail to follow the letter of the law is a hiding to nothing. However, if what you do is go, we know what the spirit of this law is, we know what it is trying to do. It is trying to understand people's preferences as individuals as deeply as possible and connect them with a rationale for this product set or the solution set that is right for them and is opposite to them. If you do that and you go, I have put in the effort to understand this person, and I've put in the effort to make sure that we have the processes to document that and the processes to ensure that what we give them as a solution is right for them, you're never going to fall foul of the law, because you're doing what it is there to do. Now, of course, I'm not saying ignore the regulation. Go through the regulation. There is, of course, a minimum number of things that you need to have in place, etc. But I think I'm in perfect agreement with what has just gone before. Our job fundamentally is to serve clients and give them investments that are right for them. And the regulation's job fundamentally is to ensure that we are doing that. And so I think it really comes down to do whatever you can to enhance your client understanding. And in an ideal world, you'd come to Oxford Risk and you'd use our profiling tools, and we've assimilated the knowledge from all the clients everywhere, etc. But it doesn't have to be that, right? It just is your process geared towards actually understanding your clients, actually documenting that, and then making sure that what you give them is appropriate for them based on your knowledge of who they are.
Fantastic. It sounds like, therefore, this is more than just compliance. This is the start of a huge journey about wealth managers becoming much closer to their clients, probably through technology, because people have got to use technology to address this problem. But you know what? Once you start using it well and it starts delivering real insights, not just because the regulator tells you need to do it, once you really start to understand your clients and are finding ways to tease information out of them, then that possibly can change the whole organization and the way it works, and for the better, Greg.
For me?
Yeah, Greg, what do you think? Yeah, I mean, this could change the way organizations work. It's not just a compliance thing. This is fundamental to the way wealth managers are going to be operating in the future.
Well, I completely agree, and it never should have been just a compliance thing, if we're honest. If we want to serve our clients, have loyal clients, this notion that this is just about protecting ourselves as an organization, of course we have to do that, and we have to comply with the law. But the value of understanding your clients is not regulatory risk reduction. The value of your understanding your clients is that you get to grow their wealth. You get to increase referrals. You get to reduce attrition. And telling connecting people to portfolios that are right for them because they meet their preferences. You create a tighter emotional bond between individuals and their portfolios, and that in turn actually makes them better investors. It makes them more likely to take cash that's sitting there doing nothing year after year after year and put it into the markets because they have a narrative for why that's right for them. And they also have a reason, once markets start getting volatile or turbulent at any point in time, to stick with it, because that emotional bond to their portfolio, they've been given a portfolio that recognizes who they are.
Love it. And we actually have one more question, which I think is worth taking from Steve, which is, we put it on screen, which is, maybe Jonas, this one could be for you, which is with the rise of robo-investors and AI-driven wealth management platforms, which is kind of what we're hinting at here. How do human wealth managers differentiate themselves in understanding and catering to investor preferences?
Yeah, very good question again. I think we have decided on a strategy on this. We can be completely wrong as everything else that I've said previously in comments, but basically we have to understand. I think one good starting point is to understand the math behind the robots, and as far as I can tell, a lot of them are doing a little more than historical back testing and fitting, which means that works great if the work keeps on repeating itself identically for forever and ever and ever. But if you throw in something else like a war in Europe or a pandemic or shockingly quick and rising yields that we haven't seen for quite some time, that type of backtesting becomes quite easy to beat. So what we've done is that we've broken down a few of them, looked at them, and realized this is not a way we're going to go. We believe in doing, statistics analysis on history, et cetera. But all the time, the market changes. So I think that for us, there will probably be a line for consumers that think that's great. They're happy with indices. There also going to be a huge number of investors think that if we try to be a bit more forward-leaning, can we take more risk? So we have strategically decided to target that type of consumers that want us to take risk and not depend too much on history, but also try to be forward-looking. I mean, how do we trade the U.S. election today, for example? How do we position in terms of U.S. infrastructure, or what baskets do we think going to get best tax benefits from the new elected government in a year's time, etc. So I think that goes back to the whole sustainability, that almost go back to the drawing board and decide what type of strategy do we want to be in. That said, we're a small, agile house. We don't have the IT legacy that was previously mentioned. It's easy for us to go out and just buy something new that with our owners believe in. So we have a luxury in that sense, I guess. But sort of for long answer, but I think that's a little bit of how we're looking at this. Really try to do the opposite than robots, because otherwise we could just do a robot and we're done with it. to put it a bit naively, I don't know if that's a good answer on the question, but it's an effort.
It's an honest answer. That's what we want. It is an honest answer. No, I think that's absolutely right, and I appreciate your bluntness on it. And if we could just move to Stefan at VP Bank. I'm really, so again, just on advice you can pass on to people. I mean, you've got great practice at this. You're on here because you are an expert. I mean, if you could just talk to our audience, some of whom will be thinking, we don't make the most of all of this. We're not cutting edge. What can you advise people on how to improve their practices?
I mean, first of all, obviously, having cutting-edge technology really helps you in your decision, and I totally agree with what Jonas said. I mean, a lot of the technology that is available these days is just a rather more fancy than formula than some real cutting-edge technology. If you identify these cutting-edge technologies and you can implement them in your processes, it definitely helps. Getting back to the question from the audience, from Steve, I would say never underestimate also the power of conversation between humans, especially when it comes to managing wealthy clients, managing family offices, managing ultra high net worth individuals. There is a long tradition of talking to each other, and there is these people are not just about do you get 2 base points more out of your investments, but it's rather also about the relation. So keeping a human side in all these discussions, explaining your decisions to your clients, explaining them in understandable terms, discussing it with them, slightly adjusting it, looking at their reaction, what is their facial expression when you present them with certain instruments, etc. Never really underestimate that fact. If you're solely looking at someone who is investing straight, go for a technological solution. If you're looking for a sustainable business relation, keep the human factor in mind.
Interesting. But you think, yeah, people need both. And Greg, just sum up the size of the opportunity here. People will be thinking, some of this technology costs money. I mean, this sounds to me like organizations should be framing this, as you said, as a way to build an emotional bond with their clients, but also win a greater share of the assets of their client. I mean, Greg, when people and ah about this and think, well, maybe it's a compliance thing, maybe it's an awkward technology thing, how do you frame it in the minds of wealth managers so they really understand the potential here?
If you frame it as a regulatory requirement and a compliance resolution thing, then it's a cost, right? But understanding your clients is something that actually should add value, right? Because if I do that, I get, the opportunity. The biggest behavioral cost for most investors and reliably costly behavioral cost, is not what they do when they invest. It's the fact that all around the world, people with money to invest are leaving too much of it doing nothing on the sideline year after year after year after year. Now, if I can use client understanding to put the right narrative in front of people, to put the right message, the right tool in front of people, the right product, and I can get them to put that wealth to work, then it is in their interest. They get much better returns over time. But I, as an organization, grow my AUM. I can do the same. I can use the same information because I've created this emotional bond with them and their portfolio. I know what to say to them when markets get volatile. That giving the right message to the right client at the right time in the right tone, these aren't costs, right? Using the technology to be able to do that, you're growing AUM and you're retaining AUM and you've got more loyal client base, etc. And the technology costs in order to do that are negligible compared to the upside that you're going to get if you're getting a basis point, share of AUM on your clients.
Fantastic. Guys, thank you so much for your expertise. We covered a lot more ground than I thought we would do. And I love some of the messages here that, there's some incredible technology out there that isn't just about compliance. You really can get to know your clients incredibly well. And some of the interfaces, some of the platforms supplied by companies like Oxford Risk really can just change the way you deal with your clients and the way they feel about your organization, which is something I really love. So this is way more than just some tedious MiFID II issue. This could be the basis of the future of your organization, which I love. We're back on, I will check the date, 10th of October. If you want to join us, the subject is Rethinking Financial Crime Change Programs under the regulator's eye. Financial crime, huge subject. So I hope you will join us then. But today, from myself, from Greg, from Stefan and Jonas, it's goodbye. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.